John, can we start?
Yeah, certainly.
That's perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on unfortunately, the last lecture of the series State, Diversity and Security Studies on Interdependencies in Contemporary World. There certainly will be a time at the end of our meeting to summarize this project and to say thank you to some important people. But now is the time for our, let's say, intellectual feast. So the questions about the future arise out of our concerns, our cognitive need to understand, to know what can happen and to be prepared, of course, for the future. But also they arise out of our natural drive to change, to modify, and to adjust. And this is something of great importance, really, because the question about the future of political science reflects not only our scientific curiosity or whatever, our concerns, but essentially our readiness to initiate discussion and initiate some changes, to foster the development of our discipline and to make it stronger, so it could effectively fulfill its scientific functions, but also to be attractive or more attractive to our younger friends and students and future students. Such a reflections on political science as a discipline is crucial. I'm sure about it. And today we are going to perform such a reflection with our absolutely outstanding guest, Professor John Ishiyama himself, the president of the American Political Science Association, professor of political science at the University of North Texas, USA, a world-renowned scholar, a prominent figure, and extremely well-liked lecturer. John, we cordially welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Piotr. Let me start by sharing. Well, I think my presentation is visible to all, but again, the title of my talk today, and thank you all for having me, is "The Future of Political Science?" ? In other words, what is that future? It's rather uncertain in many ways. Now, let me start out with a few small disclaimers before I begin. First, my comments today are in no way reflective of the editorial policy of the American Political Science Review, nor the views of the American Political Science Association. My thoughts are actually my own. Second, my comments really are limited to my experiences with American political science, and the examples I use are based upon those experiences, although I think that these themes resonate far beyond the United States and represent challenges to our discipline globally. Third, I should warn you that I commit every known mistake in a PowerPoint presentation. There is far too much text. There is no animation, no color, no pictures. It's all black and white. And sometimes I really just read off the slides. As largely it's because as I grow older, I find that I cannot read my own handwriting, nor can I read font that is smaller than 36 points. So I'll be sharing my notes with you today. So if you bear with me and are patient, we can get through this presentation. Also, I'm actually not sure I can answer the question that I posed in the title. What is the future of political science? First, I cannot predict the future exactly. I don't have a crystal ball. And I have no ability to point predict where we will be in the next decade or two. I'm going to limit my comments, however, to talk about what I observe as trends and future prospects for our discipline. And it's largely based upon my own experiences. A little bit about myself, if you don't know, shapes how I see things and the trends in our discipline. I actually spent 18 years of my career at a primarily teaching institution, a place called Truman State University in Missouri. I loved it. I actually got my degree so I could teach political science, and I was quite happy there. But then about 14 years ago, the University of North Texas approached me and frankly gave me an offer that I could not refuse. And so for the last 14 years, I've been at a primarily research intensive institution. So I've had the fortunate experience of being at both a primarily teaching institution and a primarily research institution. I spent 9 years as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Political Science Education. It's published by Routledge and is currently one of the main journals of the American Political Science Association. But it wasn't when we founded it back in 2004, nearly 18 years ago. From 2012 to 2016, I served as editor-in-chief of the American Political Science Review. So I've edited both a journal dedicated to instruction and teaching and learning, but I've also been the editor-in-chief of one of the principal research journals in the world. In 2020, I was elected president of the American Political Science Association, and in 2021, I was inaugurated as the president of APSA, and I am currently the president until our September meeting in Montreal in 2022. So that gives you a sense of how my experiences shape my perspective on the discipline. So today, I want to talk a bit about some of the challenges we face as political science. What are some trends for the future? And what might be done to embrace that future? Now, some of the challenges, I'm going to use an example from our recent history in the United States that illustrates, I think, what are some of the primary challenges that face our discipline. In 2013, there was an amendment that was passed to the bill authorizing the American National Science Foundation called the Coburn Amendment. It was attached to a bill that was designed to fund the National Science Foundation, as well as the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Institute for Health, etc. And the amendment actually passed on a voice vote in both the House and the Senate, and it eliminated funding for political science and National Science Foundation, except for research projects that the director of the National Science Foundation certifies as promoting national security or the economic interests of the United States. In other words, it was perceived as a way to eliminate political science from the National Science Foundation. Now, as further negotiation happened before there was a final bill passed, there was negotiation that removed the wording from the 2014 authorization bill, and many in my discipline breathed a sigh of relief that somehow political science had been saved. But there was a reorganization of the National Science Foundation between 2020 and 2022 that has effectively eliminated political science, unquote, as one of the programs, as one of the programs in NSF, in favor of the creation of two directorates, a directorate that focused on national security and a directorate that focuses on the economic development of the United States. So in effect, the changes that were enacted in NSF reflected the principal themes of the Coburn Amendment. The irony of all this is that the changes were initiated by a good friend of mine and fellow political scientist, Arthur Lupia, who was one of the assistant directors at the NSF, who was the architect for removing the name political science from the NSF and replacing it with a directorate for national security and a directorate for economic development. So ironically, it was a political scientist who removed political science from the NSF. So current reorganization of the National Science Foundation effectively reflected the priorities of the Coburn Amendment. Now, this brings up some very hard questions. Although we were celebrating in 2014 that political science was saved, effectively it was removed by 2022. Now, how did this happen? That's the interesting thing is that It was one of us who removed political science from the National Science Foundation, something that the American Political Science Association had initially resisted, but has now come to accept. Now, how did this happen? Well, the basic crux of the critique of political science that was offered by people like Senator Coburn is that we are not really relevant. That, in fact, commentators at major news networks like CNN can tell the public more about politics than any of us can. Although we can assail that claim, there is some merit to this, at least in the United States. When expert commentary is asked for on some burning political issue on CNN, it is more often than not the case that a journalist will be asked for their insight more so than a political scientist. Now, why is this? Frankly, because not many people, and some who are quite intelligent, can figure out and understand what we are saying. Often we speak in a language that is directed to each other, as opposed to directed to a broader public. This must change, and the profession's leading journals should lead this change where the latest work we produce appears. And I will say that over the past 10 years or so, the major political science journals have embraced this mission of trying to make our research and scholarship transmittable and digestible by a broader public. I applaud that effort, but there's still a far way to go. Now, secondly, beyond these challenges of our lack of relevance and the struggle to regain relevance, there are some trends we can observe in our discipline. Now, this is not a collectively exhaustive or complete list by any means, but they represent trends that I have observed over the course of my last 32 years as a political scientist. First, there's a growing internationalization of the discipline. From the perspective of the United States, there is a decline of exclusively the study of American politics as a field, or at least its rebirth and recasting as a case to be compared with other fields. I'm struck by the number of my colleagues who study American politics who are now reaching out to understand political processes elsewhere that provides insights and lessons to understand our own political system. Second, the decline of the study of international conflict only, and the move towards understanding non-state conflict and civil wars and how these relate to interstate conflict. This is something that's been happening in international relations for at least the last 2 decades, is that there was a move primarily after the collapse of the Soviet Union towards understanding internal conflicts and civil wars and domestic terrorism, for example. Now, one could argue that this might change with the advent of the conflict in Ukraine, that some, like John Mersheimer, have again become quite popular because of the focus on international conflict. But I actually think that this may not be a permanent shift. There will be an interest again in international conflict, but frankly, the frequency of international conflict has actually declined. And that there's a growing sense that these international conflicts that we study are often the product of internal conflicts, internal civil wars that spill over into international conflicts. So I think there'll be increasingly, despite the war in Ukraine, that there'll be increasingly greater connections between those who traditionally saw themselves as international relations scholars and those of us who call ourselves comparativists or comparative politics scholars. Third, in political theory, I think there's a move away from studying only the political theory of the ancients and the dead white guys. Effectively, when some couple decades ago, there was a move towards, in political theory, the works of, following the works of Leo Strauss, or Straussianism, the close study of the works of the ancients in particular. I see that changing in the last decade or so. There's a move away from essentially close readings of the ancients, which, by the way, I think are still very important, towards understanding applied theory and contemporary theory and post-colonial theory and other theories that are applicable to what's happening now. One one thing I find quite interesting is that I'm a comparativist, but colleagues of mine have begun to investigate in greater depth the works of those anti-modernist scholars of the 20th century, like Martin Heidegger, and how that informs an understanding of the anti-modern reaction of many intellectuals in the non-Western world, particularly places like Russia and Iran, where there seems to have been an embrace of the anti-modernist thinking of scholars like Heidegger, which I find absolutely fascinating. And I think that is where the field has gone. A move away from simply focusing on the ancients of, Plato and then Socrates via Plato and then Aristotle, as if that's the only thing that matters in terms of the study of political theory. I think it's become much broader, and thankfully, from the perspective of a comparativist like myself, much more focused on contemporary theory. Fourth, that there's a growing unity of methodological approaches. My colleague and friend David Layton wrote a very influential piece, and also a prophetic piece in 2003, which he argued that political science was moving away from these kinds of methodological separatism, that there was a move, especially among the younger generation, towards the integration of multiple approaches, that not a segregation of the formal modelers from the normative theorists or quantitative and qualitative research, but in fact that there is a move towards or rather integrating these approaches. Now, to be sure, I still see the methodological wars. I still see, fault lines along these sort of methodological and epistemological approaches, but I see less of it now. And the more work that appears in journals like the APSR include all of these elements, often a formal, normative, quantitative, and qualitative element, and a focus on mixed methodologies. I think what Layton predicted in 2003 is slowly becoming more and more true. The expectation along with that is that a good piece of research is not solely formal, for example, or it can be the combination of a formal and normative theory, but a good piece includes multiple methodological approaches. Fifth, the growing importance of the study of diversity and the impact of an increasingly multicultural West. I think over the past 30 years, what has been quite striking is that issues of race and ethnic politics are not simply in the purview or the domain of the study of politics in the United States, but now the study of an increasingly multicultural and interconnected world. Issues such as immigration are a hot button issue, particularly in Europe, but also in the United States, and I would dare say in Asia as well. This has become an increasingly important area of study of what will the impact of this interconnected and global world and accompanying increasingly multicultural diversity have on the development of politics in the West. I see opportunities for collaboration between scholars in the United States who have studied multiculturalism and diversity and its effects with scholars throughout the rest of the world. And I think of that as a positive development. It opens up new vistas for ways in which we, as political scientists, can be relevant to policies that deal with the issues of multiculturalism. 6, the growing importance of the study of teaching and student learning. If nothing else, over the past 30 years, there has been a rediscovery of the purpose of political scientists, that we are first and foremost educators. Where support from political leaders for basic research and political science has waned, the support for improved teaching has increased. The very people who assail political scientists, like Senator Coburn, at the same time also embrace a call for improved civic engagement and civic education, particularly to strengthen the bases of democracy. So, given these trends, what might be done? Well, I think we need to return to what I think so many scholars had said before, in many ways, becoming relevant. Okay. Now, I know a lot of scholars, particularly my colleagues in international relations, often think of relevance as being becoming Henry Kissinger too. I don't think of relevance as being, the high-profile public intellectual as the best way we become relevant. Thus far, we have focused, I think, a great deal on methodological trivia, or gigantic and essentially unanswerable theoretical questions that is often of little policy relevance and not easily understandable to intelligent but not expert leaders or readers. We have lost our audience and we need to get it back. We need to pay attention to how we make our research digestible to a broader public and, frankly, to political leaders as well. Now, everyone talks about relevance, but how do we become relevant? An important role needs to be played by the discipline's leading journals. We need to publish pieces that people will read beyond political scientists. Now, I think, not to say that we started this, but one of our emphases as editors of the APSR was that the most important criteria for publication was the idea. Was the idea relevant and useful and interesting to a broader public? Not whether or not it was methodologically sophisticated, because you have the most methodologically sophisticated pieces that are utterly irrelevant. We need to work with our publishers to be more active in engaging the news media and the public at large. Cambridge University Press does this for the American Political Science Review and sends out news briefs and news releases highlighting articles that would be of interest to the broader public. Now, to be sure, however, we are scholars, and what we do is basic research. I do not think we should tailor all of our work just so that we can please a broader public. Rather, our talent, our forte is conducting basic research. However, at times, our basic research, which may not be entirely quote unquote relevant now, will be relevant to someone in the future. And when it is, that is where we need to highlight it. So one thing Cambridge University Press does is to highlight past work that has been produced by the APSR and its other suites of journals to highlight those that are relevant to contemporary political issues. We need to provide exposure to pieces that are fundamentally important, not just methodologically sophisticated, to foster public intellectual debate. I think we need to stop being afraid of politics. In a piece some years ago, in an article in a newsletter called Inside Higher Education, which is a widely read electronic newsletter in the United States, several of those interviewed said that we are essentially, as political scientists, afraid to engage in politics. There is nothing wrong with political scientists becoming engaged in the public debate on topical issues or becoming engaged to defend democracy. In fact, we probably have insights that could be a much more effective defense of democracy than is currently being offered by our political leaders. And as a discipline, we need to focus on teaching and learning again. What we do best is acquiring basic knowledge. What makes us most relevant is imparting that knowledge onto future generations. Where we have the greatest impact and the greatest relevance on a daily basis, in my opinion, is not to become Henry Kissinger, but is via our teaching. We need to refocus on teaching now more than ever because there is a great need to re-engage our citizens in the democratic process. I don't shy away from being a defender of democracy. I know that sometimes we have to be cautious about imposing our political ideology or perspectives on others, but I do not shy away from defending democracy. Politicians may not like our discipline, but they do realize the lack of civic engagement is a problem of national, if not international, significance. Promoting civic engagement and civic education has widespread global support, but we as a discipline have not embraced this as a scholarly activity. But I think this is changing. There was a recent book published by Elizabeth Mata, also McCartney, Elizabeth Venyon, and Richard Simpson in 2021 by the American Political Science Association that directly provided avenues on which we can promote the teaching of civic engagement globally. It was actually a fascinating book, and I would encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, to take a look. It's about not just civic engagement in the West, but throughout the world, even under authoritarian contexts. How one teaches civic engagement, for example, in the People's Republic of China. There is a new world of technology where we're only beginning to understand what works and what does not work in terms of pedagogy in an online environment. And this is one thing I think that what COVID did to most all of us is that it forced us to engage our students in electronic formats. And this raises many challenges. How do we engage students on Zoom or on Teams? How do we promote our discipline when we essentially see each other in 2 dimensions, not 3? Third, in this era of assessment and accountability of higher education, which has widespread public support, where stakeholders, students, and parents are asking, what are my children learning? And can those skills be used to gain gainful employment, for example? We need to do a much better job of showing how what we do in the classroom actually leads to student learning. One thing I'm a passionate supporter of is the idea that political science promotes skills that are employable and useful. Skills like critical thinking and problem solving. Skills like how to write and how to speak publicly. These are skills that are not shared by the broadest part of the population, but are skills that are inherently important in the development of leadership at all levels. These are skills that we teach our students. Now, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but I think that, there's, in the United States, there's an emphasis on practical skills like business education or computer science, or doing something in the lab that will get you gainful employment. Well, I would dare say that, my brother is an engineer. And he told me once that he wished he had the skills I had because now he's in management. People with our skills are leaders and bosses. People who have these practical skills are employees. I think we need to emphasize and essentially brag about the skills that our students learn in our classes. And why should we do this? Well, it is simply what we're supposed to do. We are both teachers and scholars. Now, it doesn't mean that all good researchers become great teachers, because frankly, they don't. But if you only want to do research and cannot teach, what is the point? Then no one will know what you know. If you teach and do not do research, then how are you going to learn, and what is exactly it is that you are teaching? The two have always gone hand in glove. Gone are the days when you could be exclusively a researcher or exclusively a teacher, in my view. So what is the future? In the short run, we will have to prepare for a post-COVID era. The title or the theme of my conference in Montreal at the PSA is towards a post-pandemic political science. What do we do in a world that has been fundamentally changed by the pandemic and by conflict? We must be much better about connecting our scholarship with practice and teaching. That's essentially the theme of the conference. In the long run, I think the face of the discipline, and particularly in the United States, will change. More scholarship based on international and comparative perspectives, which can be justified in terms of the national security and economic interests, will occur in the United States. More efforts to connect with a broader audience beyond our esoteric or little group of political scientists, and more effort on justifying our existence and being more active in defending our discipline. Ultimately, I don't know what the future will be like for our discipline, a discipline that I have come to love over the past 32 years. It will be difficult. A threshold has been crossed, and we have to prepare for this uncertain future. In times of political and economic insecurity, greater cultural and ethnic diversity, rising potential for conflict, and less knowledge in this political sphere, in my view, the world needs what we have to offer more so than ever before. It will be a future, however, that we make, or I would say the younger scholars of the world make, as the next generation of political scientists. And I thank you for your attention.
John, thank you very much for this extremely inspirational lecture. We have a lot of things to think about, to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, should you have any questions, please post them in the chat or raise your hands, and we will turn on your cameras and microphones. John, if I may, I have some questions first. Let's try to put it straight. Could you please place yourself on the scale from 0 to 10, where 0 stands for political science has no future, and 10 stands for political science will become a queen of sciences? Let's try to have a little fun.
Okay. So would you like me to have other questions, or you want me to just start with this one?
Let's start with this one.
Actually, I'm quite an optimist. I would place myself at 8. I don't think, we'll ever become the queen of the sciences, but we have a very bright future, in my view. I mean, sometimes we're very down on our discipline, that there's something all is lost and everything is bad. But, my immediate predecessor as president of the APSA, Jan Bach-Steffensmeier, who's been a longtime friend, actually gave a really very interesting talk at her presidential address, where she thought that we are on the cusp of the golden age of political science. And she had reasons why, is that there are trends in our discipline that sometimes we fail to recognize, that really this is the information we're producing now is of great interest to policymakers. For example, this interest in the decline of democracy presents an opportunity in ways like, well, what do we need to do in order to better promote democracy, not only institutionally, but educationally? How do we, what's striking to me is that in the United States, how few know anything about our political system. Less than a third can identify all 3 branches of government in the United States. Almost a third cannot identify a single right guaranteed in the Constitution. Now that, there is a reason why we have the politics we have in our country. And that's the reason. And who's best able to promote things like civic education and civic engagement, which has historically been a mission of our discipline since the foundation of the APSA? We are. And now for once, the policymakers are asking us. The Biden administration has created an office, a national office in the executive office of the president on promotion of civic education. And who is the Biden administration asking? Notable political scientists. The other thing that we're doing is that we have not just the classic problem-solving skills, which, as you know, problem-solving is essentially part of leadership. And now everyone is studying leaders ever since Horowitz et al. And international relations about how leaders make a difference. And now everyone wants to know, how do you create leaders that are better problem solvers? We do this. We also teach our students how to write and how to speak. They're in great demand. I would also say that the events in the world have made us more accessible. I've never been asked many more questions about post-Soviet politics than now, particularly in the wake of the war in Ukraine. Now everyone is interested. No one was interested before. Now everyone knows where Zaporizhzhia is. Everyone knows where Donetsk is. Now, they didn't know this 6 months ago, and suddenly we're relevant again. So this is a moment of opportunity, but also because there are longer-term trends that my colleague Jan pointed out, and that is there's a great interest in big data. We're one of the few social sciences that really does focus on how to deal with big data. And there is a great demand for analysts of big data, not only in government, but in the private sector as well. We are finding in my discipline, or my department, that many more of our PhD graduates are now being employed by private sector companies who are interested in doing things like investment companies. We've placed 2 of our PhDs with large investment companies like Charles Schwab and JP Morgan here as risk analysts, because what do investors interested in? is the probability of risky investments. And they use big data. So not only can they prognosticate about risk, they can actually process data to demonstrate empirically what risks exist. No other discipline can do that talks about political risk except us. So actually, I'm an 8. I think we have a very bright future if we seize the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Right. So thanks to you, I made my decision to be an optimist. I mean,
yes,
really. John, is there any, let's say, a global center and global peripheries or outskirts of political science? Well, of course, this is the question about the impact of modern political science, but also about the validity or reasonability of evaluating national scientific traditions through the perspective of categories like impact factor and number of citations, etc. What do you think about it?
Well, I think for better or worse, historically, that global center was the United States. It was. I mean, essentially, I think U.S. Publications, U.S. scholarship tended to dominate political science, particularly after the behavioral revolution of the 1960s and early 70s. However, I think that's shifting. I actually think that U.S. dominance of global political science is not waning, but is becoming less. I see the centers of scholarship moving abroad, particularly in Europe. I think Western European scholars and institutions have taken the lead in many ways in terms of shaping the features of political science. I see it as a positive that the successors as editors of the APSR were at Mannheim, at the University of Mannheim, after we ended our term in 2016. I think that is sort of significant or signifies a shift. Now, there's a qualitative shift, meaning that global political science earlier was dominated by quantitative methodologies. Frankly, it was, and that there was a focus in the wake of the behavioral revolution on effectively methodological trivia. That has moved away. As we move more towards mixed methodologies, particularly qualitative methodologies like process tracing, you see much more development there in Europe. The greater use of QCA, for example, qualitative comparative analysis, that has far deeper roots, I think, in European scholarship than in the United States. You see much more of that as well. I think that you're seeing, as you see the greater eclecticism in methodology, you'll see a shift away from the dominance of the United States to elsewhere. And I see that happening. Now, I also see that you have greater interest in political science in places that may not have been or may have been counted as a periphery. I think that political science in Asia is fast developing, led largely by the Koreans and the Japanese. I mean, the Koreans have fully embraced the study of political science, and they invited me to talk there several times. I'm really quite struck by how rapidly the discipline has developed there. I would also dare say that political science is beginning to take off in places that we would not think they would, such as in Africa. That through efforts of many Western associations, including the APSA, that there has taken root a greater sense of political science and its studies as relevant to the global South. So yeah, I see there's a shift. I think that the United States still dominates in many ways, like the citation indices and the JCR, but I see a shift over the past 30 years that it's moving away from hegemony to something else.
It might be perceived as a another source of optimism.
Yes, I think so. I believe so. Yes, I believe so. I think that it's the move towards mixed methodology has become more inclusive of the discipline. That it's not just knowing various forms of regression will get you published in the APSR, but now that you have actually something important to say and you have multiple tools at your disposal to show it.
Right. John, you said that we have lost our audience and need to get it back. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to refer to this problem, to this issue. Well, social perception of political science as a discipline varies among countries and societies. What are the main reasons of such differences, and what does it mean for the future of this discipline?
I can't speak, globally why that's the case. I do know that in the United States in particular, there's sort of an anti-intellectual bent. So much of the criticism of political science is sort of rooted in the American suspicion of intellectualism, which isn't true everywhere. I know that in many other places in the world, intellectuals are held in high regard, and so that might contribute to cross-national differences. I actually think that. There is a suspicion of political science in part because people hate politicians. And that degree of hate of politics is greater in some countries than in others. I think in the United States,
The case of Poland.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I think people hate politicians, and therefore, whether we like it or not, our name is political. And often I think the unfamiliar think that we train politicians. I know in the United States, the stereotype is political science. It teaches politics and trains politicians and lawyers, probably two of the most hated professions in this country, as being a lawyer and a politician. I think that contributes to it. One of, by the way, I was not opposed to the changes in the National Science Foundation, largely because, as my friend Skip Lupia argued, and I think quite persuasively, is that to persuade our political leaders to respect us, we had to lose the name political, and because they couldn't get over the name political. However, that's why he started talking about what we do strengthens our national security, strengthens democracy, and strengthens economic development, which is, by the way, what we do. So he simply renamed the directorates and stopped calling them political science. And now NSF is more well funded than ever before, particularly programs that are related to political science. There was an authorization in the latest bill that added $10 million to the study of economic development, national security, and democracy, which were all the things that we did before, except we used to call it political science. So I think that sort of distrust of what we do often is just a matter of symbolism, how we present ourselves. Because to persuade our politicians to go along, we had to get rid of the term political science, even though we still all call ourselves political scientists. We just don't say that to them.
Mm-hmm. Right. And when we are talking about the distrust, I'd like to ask another question. Well, you all know that everything is in constant flux, and we are living in more and more complex reality. And I claim that this fact gives us a really strong argument in favor of inter or multidisciplinarity. And of course, such research is demanding, but I feel that it is not the case in our community, political science community. I feel that many political scientists are still somehow afraid of eventual, I don't know, identity crisis of our discipline or something like this. What do you think about it? How would you address this problem?
Well, there is actually there's a task force that I have initiated at APSA called Rethinking Political Science Education, which actually addresses these issues of what is political science, how are we unique, or what is our identity? And on the one hand, there have been many who argue that much of the malaise that faces our discipline is that we don't know who we are. We don't know what our identity is. How are we different from other disciplines? What do we have to offer that is unique and cannot be found elsewhere? In terms of political science education, it's been framed as how do you persuade parents who pay tuition dollars for their students to come to university? How do they justify studying political science, for instance, as opposed to economics or sociology or psychology or something else, right? I think there is something to that. It's what is our identity, that we are a bit afraid of talking about who we are and what we can offer. And I think we need to do that. However, on the other hand, though, if one looks at the origins of our discipline, of modern political science, particularly after the behavior revolution. It was rooted in this effort at producing interdisciplinarity, that there were multiple causes, for example, of democracy other than just drawing up a correct constitution, that there were other factors like economics, social structure, psychology, history that also affects the things we wanted to explain, like the emergence of democracy. I think political science, by its very nature, is the most interdisciplinary of all the social sciences. However, that also create, and I mean, what other discipline in the social sciences actually uses the kind of methodologies we use, which are very eclectic? Now, that's sort of both a blessing and a curse of our origins, is that, it was a blessing in that we could see and understand phenomena from multiple perspectives. And we are, in my view, and the origins, the most interdisciplinary of all the social sciences. On the other hand, it also means that it's hard to figure out what we are in contrast to the other social sciences. How are we different? We can't just keep saying that we're the big tent that includes everybody, because that's like saying you have no identity. So the challenge is, how do you keep this commitment to our origins of interdisciplinarity while at the same time being able to tell audiences what we are and how we are different from other fields? What can we uniquely offer to our constituencies and our students? That's a challenge. That's hopefully we can work about that.
Right. And in the field of didactics, in the field of teaching, what are the main challenges connected with multidisciplinarity? Of course, I'm looking at the article of Brenda Kaufman in your book, and I'm still thinking about this issue. So what are the main challenges? How do you think?
Well, again, it's related to who we are in terms of how do we present ourselves to our students? I mean, our students have many stereotypes and prejudices about our field. In the United States, they think we produce politicians or we produce lawyers, and that's all we do, and both of those are hated. How do we make it? How do we show our students that what we offer to them is valuable? And I think, in my view, the best way to do it is to say, unabashedly, that we want them to know something about the political system and the world in which they exist so they can better navigate that system. I mean, there's no other discipline that talks about political systems and how to be a citizen more than we do. And I think that, the challenge is to getting that message across. Now, how do you get that message across through this wall of prejudice about our discipline? And frankly, the lack of knowledge about basic things that happen in politics. That is a huge challenge. But I think it has a lot to do with how we communicate the message, that we have to rethink how we communicate that message. I remember Skip Lupia again. I talked to him a lot about such things. And he said, one of our problems is that we often begin our conversations with, "You're stupid." And, that's not how you begin a conversation. And I have to admit that sometimes, you hear, we always talk about how stupid our students are, or stupid the politicians are, or stupid, particular parts of the ideological spectrum are, but you can't really teach them anything if you start by saying you're stupid.
Right. When it comes to our colleagues, to other scholars, do you identify any false beliefs about political science held by political scientists themselves?
God, there are so many. I mean, one thing that I think is always a continuing threat is our tendency to retreat into methodological tribes.
All right.
That we tend, that we tend to develop stereotypes about, quote unquote, the other side. That, for example, there are some in our discipline who are beholden to certain methodologies, who think that the other approaches are trying to undermine them and destroy them, and that they always have to be, they have to defend their ism. There was an article written by a friend of mine who's actually one of the chairs of my task force, David Lake, that appeared when he was president of the International Studies Association, an article about the isms, how that scholars in our discipline tend to retreat into their churches and beholden to their isms and identify with the isms as opposed to trying to be scholars. I think that is the greatest challenge in
Right.
terms of how we move forward, is that we should not retreat into our isms. I once
Mhm.
had, I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me and say, "What are you?" And I'm thinking, what? I'm actually Japanese American. So, but that's not what they're asking. They're asking if I'm a constructivist, or if I'm a realist, or if I'm an ism, as if that identifies immediately what I do. And frankly, I have no ism at all. I think of political science as a set of challenges, and that these isms are merely just tools in a toolbox that I can use, and I use the right tool to answer the question that's posed before me. And that's how I think of it. But too often we retreat into our isms, we retreat into our churches, and that is the
Yeah.
greatest challenge of all, how to overcome that. And
Yeah.
those are all falsehoods, by the way.
Right. I fully agree. To be honest, this is the problem. This is the conflict arising within the community of Polish political scientists. It is becoming very obvious, unfortunately, and there is no easy solution for this conflict. But never mind.
Yeah, but that
Oh.
it's facing the entire world, by the way. Not a good thing, but yeah, that's the biggest problem of all.
Mhm. Uh, uh, Ladies and gentlemen, our meeting is unfortunately coming to an end, but we are staying with really great perspectives for further discussions and professional activism in favor of political science. That's for sure. John, thank you so much for your time and inspirational lecture and inspirational discussion. I won't hesitate to say that we all want more. And so for now, I'd like to say till the next time. Till
Thank
the
you,
next
Piotr.
time.
Thank you, everybody, for having me. It was a great. I really enjoyed talking to you all. Thank you.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the series State, Diversity and Security Studies on Interdependencies in Contemporary World. To be honest, it is a truly, emotional moment for me because I feel that we've done something important for the community of our faculty and political science community in Krakow in general. Uh, First of all, I would like to cordially thank our outstanding guests and friends, Professor John Ishiyama, Abigail Eisenberg, Nick Pope, Robert Cohen, Bogusław Pacek, Artur Gruszczak, Brygida Kuźniak, and Orian Kaligaro. I would like to thank our students, our PhD candidates, other scholars who decided to be with us and to and follow our lectures. I'd like to cordially thank also Mr. Konrad Kulik, our IT specialist, and Dr. Magdalena Lisińska, who was responsible for promotion of our events. Gorąco Państwu dziękuję. And for the end, a little surprise. In October of this year, we are launching a new project, which is called PolImpact, Social Relevance and Impact of Political Science. So, yeah, there will be action, that's for sure. So stay tuned. Once again, thank you very much. Until the next time.
Thank you. Bye bye now.
Thank you very much.